There's a newly released report by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding that says that Muslims are internalizing Islamophobia and that the media is to blame. The study found that Muslims are more likely than members of other faiths to agree with the sentiment that their community is more, quote, prone to negative behavior than other people. Let's take a look at one of these graphics. So there you can see the ISPU's third annual American Muslim poll surveyed Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, white evangelicals, and those who are non-affiliated and compared attitudes across the groups. What you're looking at now was in response to, I believe my faith community is more prone to negative behavior than other faith communities. So you can see an overwhelming 30% coming from the Muslim respondents to the survey. If you need a little bit of a brush up on what is internalized racism, here you go. Internalizing racism involves ingesting, often subconsciously, acceptance of the dominant society's stereotypes of one's ethnic group. What is the takeaway from this study? The ISPU Director of Research says, quote, it's the combination of disproportionate media coverage and Muslims being much more focused on that kind of media coverage that explains the fact that Muslims themselves have internalized this very stereotype of being prone to violence. The report also found that those who scored higher on the Islamophobia index were associated with greater support for President Donald Trump's travel bans and increased surveillance of American mosques. So a pretty startling research. Were either of you surprised that this was coming out?
So I actually have a report on this that I am in the middle of writing.
All right.
For Pop Culture Collaborative. It looks at over 100 years of representation of Muslims on TV and film. And it lines up exactly with the findings of the study, which is that there aren't available, quote unquote, positive or authentic full images of Muslims on television. Things are shifting now, but what we have had to ingest through political campaign ads, through primetime news, through movies like American Sniper or Argo was the degradation of our faith and of our communities. Mm-hmm. So it's hard not to, and I'll give you an anecdote, I have many anecdotes, but I run a lot of workshops nationally around the representation of Arabs and Muslims on television and film, and I do a quick little activity in the beginning where I ask people to think about the images that they see or the things that come to mind when they hear the word terrorist, the things that come to mind when they hear the word Muslim, and the things that come to mind when they hear Arab. And usually what's consistent is that all the same adjectives are used for all three categories. And so I've had Muslims tell me afterwards, is it weird that I couldn't think of anything that wasn't terrorist-like for Muslim? Mm-hmm. And I was like, it's not, because think about the images that you're constantly being exposed to. And yes, you might have family structures and communities that are counter to what you're seeing, but it's so hard to displace the imagery around you. And the thing that also was really striking is The Intercept did the story, and shout out to Murtaza, who is an amazing reporter there. And they found that there was disproportionate coverage of violence perpetrated by Muslims 7 times on television, 7 times more, and that Muslims received 4 times longer sentencing for the same crimes as non-Muslims. So that's, I mean, sadly, it's not surprising that they would view themselves in this way. And unfortunately, it's double the amount of every other religious community's understanding of themselves in a negative light.
Yeah, it's Islam's turn, as it happens with religion, with regard to history in this country and this world. I went to Israel 2 years ago, and I remember having dinner, and one of my friends she's a writer, was sitting next to me, mm-hmm. and she laughed at me because I was like, I'm getting up and I'm leaving. This Palestinian man was sitting here telling me how bad Palestinians were and how horrible they've been to Israel, who's been so good to them, and that they need to learn. And I was just watching this personification of self-hate to a degree that I couldn't even eat my food. And she's Colombian, and she was like, mm-hmm. why does this upset you so much? And I'm like, my ex-husband is Muslim. My children were raised in a Muslim-friendly home. And not just that, I was like, as a person of color, self-hate is something that, resonates with me because it's so prevalent in all people of color, because the pictures of us are so bad, that are constantly being depicted, that we are all walking around trying to dispel the myths of our own people because we feel a responsibility to that, while white people get to glide around the planet just being white because they don't have to carry the weight of all white people.
Right. They don't have to carry the burden of representation and to see what the consequences are for that as well. So I would just quickly add, there was this interesting roundtable conversation with producers and showrunners with the New York Times after Trump's election. And the showrunner for Quantico said that he wanted to stop doing terrorism plots after the election. And the New York Times reporter pointedly asked Howard Gordon from 24 and Homeland if he felt like his shows contributed to the negative sentiments about Muslims, anti-Muslim rhetoric and sentiments. And he said, yes.
Wow.
And he also had kind of a coming to Jesus moment as well. But those folks are not just doing that for Trump's base. But as we were saying, people in my community are also feeling that way. And I'll just lastly add that it's hard because we carry that burden, and at the same time, we are horrified by the violence perpetrated to mostly our community by groups like Daesh, ISIL, or any group purporting to lead a Muslim quote-unquote caliphate or whatnot. But then we're also made to speak to it. And they're killing us in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and in parts of West Africa. And so I think we're just in such a rock and a hard place. It's hard to even think straight.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.